Happy New Year, viewers, and welcome back to Environmental History Worth Reading. This is our first episode of 2017, featuring picks from December 2016. I'm Sean Courage, one of the editors here at niche-canada.org, and I'm joined by Jessica.
I'm Jessica DeWitt, and I'm the social media editor for Niche.
All right, Jessica, you've got your picks from December 2016 here, so viewers will have to cast their mind back to 2016 to remember what some of the best writing, video, audio, and other web content related to environmental history that was shared on social media that month. And your first pick comes from the New York Times, and this is an incredible piece here on rivers and changing rivers over time.
Yes, it's mainly a visual piece, so there's not a lot to talk about, but scientists have used satellite images to illustrate the way that rivers and lakes have changed over, I think, the last 30 years.
Yeah.
So it's kind of amazing to watch the rivers meander at different places and the lake shrink. I think Lake Mead is featured in this particular post, and you can see that shrink considerably. And it was just very popular amongst environmental historians, and I think worth checking out.
And this was a number of groups, including Google, using satellite imagery. So I just showed the Lake Mead visualization here, but then you've got these other lakes that are growing in the Tibetan Plateau in China as a result of climate change and ice melt from glaciers. This is incredible, right up the HGIS alley, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, your second pick comes from Seeing the Woods, the Rachel Carson Center blog, and this is a post written by Jonathan Clapperton and Lisa Piper.
Yes, so they put out the latest Perspectives issue, which is environmental knowledge, environmental politics. And John and Lisa are writing to talk about the fact that they wrote the introduction to that issue a year ago. And when they originally wrote things in the environmental area, were looking on the up and up, and things were optimistic. And since then, since the issue has been actually released, with the Standing Rock issues and the election of Trump, etc., things are looking much more pessimistic. And so they're addressing that and looking at the ways that historians have to be activists in a post-truth world, and that we as historians need to stay relevant, we need to stay vocal, and we need to amplify our community. So I just thought it was a good post and relevant for our times. So.
And this post, of course, wasn't alone. There were several, and I think this is starting to kind of bubble up a little bit this month as well. Environmental historians revisiting the question of what environmental history can bring to contemporary environmental challenges. And just a quick shout out again that Clapperton and Piper edited this issue from 2016 of the Rachel Carson Center's Perspectives Journal on environmental knowledge, environmental politics, case studies from Canada and Western Europe, which is a free publication that viewers can get access to.
Yes.
We've got the link in the post this month. We move over to the Atlantic, picking up on similar themes about environmentalism. This is a look back at the environmental movement and its links to social justice movements.
This is by Jedediah Purdy, and he opens up by arguing that the incoming Trump administration is likely to see the greatest revival of environmentalism as a confrontational, grassroots, sometimes radical movement since at least 1970. So he's looking at current issues, similar to what Lisa and John were doing, and he's arguing that environmentalism, mainstream environmentalism, and environmental justice have split ways in recent decades. And he, in this post, looks back to a time where he argues the two movements were intertwined, so that empowering workers and protecting public health were on the same lines as protecting the landscape, etc. So I think that there are some environmental historians out there that would argue against that concept, but I think it's a good article and worth reading, and has a lot of good points. So,
And we've got a Canadian case study here, a really interesting look at the environmental legacies of the General Electric plant in Peterborough.
Yes, I thought this was a good follow-up to the last two posts, which takes us to a pretty in-depth case study. So they're looking at this community of workers and the toxic legacy of their careers. So this plant has been known to use over 3,000 chemicals actively. It's known that the soil underneath the plant is contaminated, and basically, this is leading to so many cancers and other terminal illnesses. So in this article, the writer interviews a lot of these people who are suffering with these consequences, and it's pretty moving. It's very detailed, and I think it's a good read. Um, Mainly for the emotional aspects, I think it ties together the actual environmental issues and health issues quite well with personal stories, which I think sometimes environmental historians aren't as good at doing. So,
It's an area too in Canadian history research that still has a lot of room for exploration. I think it's a subject matter that's been explored in a number of important books in environmental justice, environmental history in the United States, but not as much in Canada, especially for late 20th century topics. Well, you wrap up this month's set of picks with a blog post from a blog called Savage Minds, Notes and Queries in Anthropology, reflecting on decentering the human in anthropology and science studies.
so this actually, despite the title, plays quite well with the other environmental justice articles. And what she's asking is, in the beginning, is in what ways does the non-human matter when Native, Black, queer bodies, etc., are systematically under assault?
Mm-hmm.
And basically, she's looking at how to decolonize anthropology, and she's discussing how anthropology is distrusted because it's largely a field that's dominated by white voices and white perspectives. And although she's talking about anthropology, I think that these criticisms have been weighed against environmental history and history in general as well. So I think it's something that historians should tackle and look at. So she's looking at, looks at capitalism and the way that capitalism has shaped the field of anthropology, and ultimately she's arguing that focus on the human negates the humanity of certain peoples, because if you're defining what is human, ultimately people are going to be left out of that. Whereas if you have a broad spectrum of the entire natural world and you can include humanity in that, then that helps to include people into the discipline. So I just thought it was an interesting argument, and one to think about. It's a perspective that I hadn't necessarily come upon before. So.
Yeah, it's highly relevant for environmental historians, especially students who are new to the field, thinking about history from a biocentric rather than an anthropocentric perspective, but a really unique argument here. Well, readers will find a lot to dive in from your picks this month. They can find them all over at niche-canada.org for the December 2016 Environmental History Worth Reading picks. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you, Sean.